Hi, I'm Casey, Director of Communications at Snorkel.
Hi, I'm Jake. I'm one of our strategy and operations leads here at Snorkel, specifically working on our expert data as a service offering.
Awesome. We sounded so formal in that. All right, Jake, I was going to ask you, tell us about your role at Snorkel, and you were just formally introduced that. But
I queued off of you. You did it.
you did. I know. That was really formal for me too. I didn't have any pizzazz there, but okay. Now that we know our roles in a very formal capacity, let's sit back and
Mm,
chat all things Snorkel expert data as a service. So I guess backing up, you just told us what your role is at Snorkel, but can you give us a little bit of background of what brought you to Snorkel and what
yeah.
made you so excited about the opportunity to be part of this team?
Yeah, happy to share. Um, So I worked in the AI space for about 5 or so years, from 2016 to 2021, at a company called Data Robot, and then a number of actually ex-Data Robot employees have since come over to Snorkel. So there was already kind of this familiarity, with the team, so to speak. But the more that I also learned about Snorkel's, offering this notion of like data annotation, both on the platform side and then recently in our expert data as a service side, gotten more and more inspired by the mission, the idea that like really the underlying data for AI is going to be like the secret sauce to where everybody's going to get their alpha, whether that's an enterprise, training their own internal models, or it's your frontier labs, racing toward AGI. So very exciting, kind of very inspired by the mission. The opportunity was also really exciting from like where I am in my career and the kind of expert data as a service offering where it was very nascent. I think when I joined the team was maybe 20 or so 30 people. So it was this really interesting like startup within a startup opportunity. And I've been a builder and executor for most of my career. Love earlier stage. The last company I was at was actually much later stage, and quickly realized that's not my bread and butter. I like making decision and just running with it. And getting to be, kind of one of the earlier folks on this front, and getting to try to set a lot of these visions and, put initial stakes in the ground, but also revisit them and continue to build as the service gets bigger and bigger, was kind of, right, I think, where I wanted to be, and been having a blast ever since joining.
That's awesome. How long have you been here for now?
It's like
Yes.
simultaneously 6 minutes, like 6 months, and like 60 years. But officially 6 months. I joined
Okay.
mid-December or so, right before the new year.
Okay. Cool. And you said, strategy and operations
Mm.
on the DAS side. What does that mean in a
Yeah.
context? Because strategy and ops is pretty broad.
It is, and it's kind of like the blessing and the curse, I'd say, of that function and of that role generally. So strategy and operations, I'd say generally, you can kind of think of as like the glue to a specific either organization or offering function, kind of like our DaaS business, which means that there's a lot of moving pieces internally to go from client comes to us and says we want a data set on like STEM at the PhD level. How do you take that and take it as a SOW, right, a scope of work from them, translate it to a specification that our experts that we partner with, right, our third party experts, how do you take that, translate to a spec that they'll be able to understand, and a way that they can follow and create these unique, new, novel data points, and then deliver it back to the client? And there's like pay that goes on beside, between the gears there. There's our actual platform and getting it set up and like running the plumbing of that end to end pipeline. But even thinking like more traditionally, we are a business offering and kind of a function. We need to have like goals, right? OKRs for lack of a better term. We have to do communications with like an all hands presentation or a weekly newsletter. So there's a lot that kind of happens, behind the scenes, I would say, and that's where strategy and ops tends to really fit in. Is it simultaneously thinking bigger picture? What do we need to be doing, at that strategic planning level to advance our mission and advance our offering, for over the next 6 months, over the next year, 3 years, but also like in the weeds, and it's answering support tickets from our experts. It's responding to them on Slack. It is processing, payments for them, or it's actually like guiding them through the project, and really helping troubleshoot and answer questions live, and kind of really building a great sense of community for these folks. So that way, when they're not on, a project, we're not just kind of like leaving them, alone. Really trying to work towards fostering more of that community and keeping them engaged, even intra project.
Yeah. You guys do communications very well, I have to say. Props to the DAS crew as a communications
I was gonna
person.
say it
I
means a
feel like
lot
you
coming
guys
from
are
our comms
nailing it.
director.
Yes, you guys, and I think one of the things that's been great is like how you've managed this, EC
Mm,
network and this your expert community. And kind of that's become a bit of a differentiator
Mm.
for Snorkel as well, and I think how we're running it. And I'm somebody who loves community. I did that in my last role. So getting to see this come to fruition on the work you're doing is, I think really awesome. And so I guess that leads into this next question I have, which what's been your favorite part of working with experts whom we have from across, 1,000 plus domains? So it's not small.
Yeah. No, it's not. It's not small. It's not trivial by any means. There's a whole actual project that I'm working on that's like developing a taxonomy for, starting at the highest level and how do you drill down to knowing that an individual expert is a like cardiovascular surgeon very specifically because sometimes we get a client that says, I only want cardiovascular surgeons to like create data sets and it's not just medical staff. So to that point, I think it comes as no surprise that people with a deep-seated passion, right, for a specific area, sometimes very surprisingly or like amusingly niche, are incredibly fun and engaging to talk to, right? Interacting with experts on project deliverables, you really get to learn a lot about their backgrounds and their areas of interest. This includes even overlaps. Like, there's actually still a few that I swap movie recommendations with. I don't know the first thing about like oceanography, certainly at the PhD level, but we can chat about Life of Chuck or F1 movie that just came out,
Yeah.
right? So I'm big personally on learn through osmosis. And while I can't start, as I touched on, like claiming that PhD level knowledge about most topics, I've loved really getting exposed to like the breadth of information, that our expert network brings to the table through those interactions and kind of engaging with them just through a project. And I think one of the best examples, right, for that makes the work immensely rewarding is meeting experts who like were interested in AI, maybe cursorily, maybe they've played around with one of the Frontier Labs tools, but they're interested in it, but they have like no idea how to apply their knowledge to the field. And we get to be that opportunity. We ran a project that wrapped up around March or April, I want to say, and like a great example from this is a couple people who had like music theory or media studies or frankly like non-traditional, not STEM backgrounds when we think of AI, and they had no idea that they'd be able to still work in or like contribute to AI. And so it was immensely rewarding for them and kind of, as a transitive property or by proxy, super rewarding to see people get extremely excited and like have so much, praise and kind of excitement even after the project wrapped up, like a lot of excitement and eagerness to participate, going forward too.
That's awesome. So we won't come to you if we need heart surgery,
No, please
but
don't.
but you might know who to go
I,
to.
I know a few heart surgeons now.
That's awesome. And I love the transitive property. I use that. I use that metaphor all the time. So totally in sync with that. So I guess thinking about running this
Mm,
network, and I think we can call it world class. What's one surprising skill or quality that you think it takes to run a
mm.
network of this caliber?
Yeah. Ooh, I mean, we also have, I don't know the exact number, but we might have even crossed over like some odd 10,000, folks
Wow.
within our network. Don't quote me on the number because it could be much higher actually by now,
Off the record. That'll be
off the
off the
record.
record number.
Right. But I would say community building is super underrated, and communications actually ends up being a big part of that. I like that we're like coming back to this
Yeah.
so this theme here. I find myself describing our experts as like ravenous sometimes, meaning that they're like clamoring to join projects and contribute. As I touched on, even at the end of that project, like very excited and very eager to continue to contribute to the field of AI, whether they come from like a more traditional AI background or not. So keeping them engaged, right, and encouraging that sentiment of them being part of a community ends up being super important. So that way, when a project with their skill set does appear, they're ready to go, kind of at the drop of a hat. I'd say if we weren't intentional and thoughtful about community building, and we still have a ways to go on that front, it would be much harder to like re-engage these folks, right, and bring them back to the table. Because sometimes these projects can kind of spiky. It depends on the client's needs themselves, or our own internal research needs. So they can be kind of spiky, and that ability to re-engage is really important. So community building can be tough, and it's part
Mhm.
like content moderator, right? There are interesting. Oh, I got a thumbs up on
You got a thumbs
on
up. We're
screen.
with you.
Yeah. So it's part content moderator. It is part like customer service agent. It's part messenger, right? Don't shoot the messenger. And even part peer, right? Like with some of these projects, while I'm not necessarily the one creating the data points or doing it, I'm empathizing with these folks in our Slack channels and in our ways that we communicate with them. We come across like a fork in the road or a decision that's been made or like an ambiguity in the rubric, and I actually get to jump on sessions with these folks and these experts and say like, well, what do you think it should be, or I can lend my perspective on how we should treat this, and we actually end up collaborating a lot of times on that rubric or on those guidelines in order to get to the final thing and kind of run with that through the whole project. So at the end of the day, being an effective communicator, I think, ends up going a long way in my experience, as experts also just begin to trust you more, right? And even look forward to like announcements or updates from us. And that trust is super, super critical, because there are times that we don't do things perfectly, right? We mess up on pay, we create a confusing spec, or we actually give sometimes like counterpoint guidance. And that trust to know that like we're going to work towards it, we're going to resolve and make it better, especially with their input, is hugely critical. Again, back to that community building, back to like re-engagement, and focusing, for lack of a better term, like not having experts attrit from projects and be able to come back and reactivate and re-engage time over time, is immensely important to building, to your point, that like world-class, expert network.
So do we just find the title of whatever this becomes, like community building and communications?
I'm
Okay,
super bad at it. I
no.
think we need to go find like your like Discord community moderator mods and like hire more of those folks for our projects, because like that to me, especially in a project, is so what the role ends up being.
Oh
And
yeah.
if you listen to experts, like they want a single point of contact to to
Yeah.
talk to. They want somebody who they build that rapport through the project with. Yeah, it goes back to that trust
Sure.
factor.
Oh yeah. I spent
So
10 years building an expert, or excuse me, an executive community. So I
get
know
it.
exactly what it I get it. I know what it means to be that like single point of contact. It's
Uh-huh.
a full-time job and then some, no jokes. So a lot of
Truly.
hats get worn. All right, and last formal question for you, as I
Sure.
call it, and then we'll get to the real tough ones.
Excellent.
No, what drew you? You've talked about this a little bit and sort of in your intro about how you got here, but what really drew you to
Hmm.
this kind of work, and then what keeps you excited about it?
Yeah, yeah. So my background, functionally, this kind of comes to the territory of strategy and ops, is a generalist. You kind of get thrown at any like fire or ambiguous project that crops up in the organization. But even my, interests, I would say, from an industry perspective, kind of also skewed that way for a while. As I touched on, I did 5 years in AI, but then I went and worked at a video gaming startup. And then actually before I was in AI, I was in real estate tech. And most recently, before Snorkel, I was in like data privacy and compliance, type of software. But I do find myself continuing to be drawn back to AI, and some of that I think is that like we continue to be at one of the most incredible inflection points for frontier AI, right? As effectively all of your like public domain data has been swallowed up by your LLM labs, right? And so internet data, the stuff that was around before these LLMs kind of hit the scene, they act as like the fossil fuels of training information. I think OpenAI's former um, uh, chief scientist kind of that's a quote from him, so I can't claim for that, right? But again, it's just lying around the same way like fossil fuels were lying around for our energy needs, and ultimately kind of had swallowed up all that information. So this means that any alpha or any kind of incremental performance, whether that's on accuracy, whether it's on safety, whether it's going to be speed, etc., but any of that, right, is going to have to come from specialized data. And I think that's one of the key themes from Snorkel writ large that like I'm excited about, is that notion of specialized data. This is not just stuff that sits around and is publicly available. Um, and so that specialized data, however, is pretty tricky to access, because it's often like locked away in the minds of academic experts, right? Like our PhDs that we work with, or also field masters. We actually work with folks that have, right, like a JD, right, and they're practicing law. We work with our medical experts that have their MDs and have been practicing medicine for years. But we even work with folks that have just been like a technician for 20, 30 some odd years, and so they've seen, they're an expert in that notion. There's no necessarily degree or certification necessarily, but they've just seen so much of the industry and the space that they are an expert, and that's locked away, right, in their minds of all those years of experience, and kind of seeing the real world, also applying it back to academia. And the other kind of thing like taking is like an expert can also even be like your best friend that knows way too much about Star Wars or unfathomable amounts of Star Wars or whatever kind of pop culture thing. Like that's still an expert at the end of the day because these LLM labs and folks are still interested in those types of information because they want you to be able to go to their assistant and have a conversation with it and remain engaged and kind of get information from it. So I think this is underscored and undercut to really like emphasized by a certain company is like not an acquisition, right, where other AI labs and teams are finding themselves like scrambling to diversify across vendors that can provide that specialized data, right? Provide that kind of additional extra alpha, as nobody wants both like competition controlling their data, right? I'd say like whoever controls the data kind of controls AI, for a bit of like doom and gloom, I feel. So as I touched on, like I'm a builder at heart. I'm an execution oriented individual at heart, and I can't imagine like a better time to be building in one of the most exciting technologies that like my generation in particular will probably ever likely witness. So very, very excited, very, very bullish on it. Yeah.
That's awesome. And my last question for you, what is one thing that you makes you even more excited than working at Snorkel? I know the answer, but well, I think I know the answer, but
Yeah, yeah.
tell the crowds, tell our thousands of listeners,
Yeah, yeah.
what else you
um,
love.
so yes, the easy approximate answer was my 6 hours of pickleball yesterday would probably lend itself to that. I get very, very excited anytime I get a chance to play pickleball. But I actually will say my probably real answer is like travel, and I think this actually goes a little bit back to that notion of community building and like connection with people and all of that. Is I always have a goal that I have to keep the number of countries I have visited, like my country count, higher than my age. And so every
Oh,
year I
wow.
focus on going abroad at least two, or so different times, hitting a couple countries, everything from the food to meeting folks, individually there, exploring things that are not available to us, here in the States, etc. Normally my Zoom background is the mountain that I want to climb next.
What and I've got to ask, what's your next place on your list to visit?
So I'm going to Hong Kong in the winter, but that's more for
Nice.
a friend's wedding actually. So I'll hit
Okay.
somewhere else on it. But like my current top one that I want to hit is Bolivia, because there is a mountain
Nice.
there that has a 20,000 foot summit, and the most I've done is
Right.
15 or 16. So this is my next like
Okay. Your next altitude you
incremental
gotta get.
exactly that I gotta go. So you
Okay.
get the like you get ice axes and crampons. It's a whole thing. So
God, you and
yeah,
I have very different ideas of vacations, but there's
truly.
something out there for everyone. So. All right, Jake, this was awesome. Thank you so
Likewise.
much for chatting. If
Of
people
course.
want to learn more about what you're working on and what we're doing at Snorkel, where should they go?
On our website, we have our expert data as a service offering pinned. This is one of the offerings at the top, and that is both for anyone interested at our Frontier AI Lab or at an enterprise developing your own models internally, as well as any third-party experts that might be looking for this. So if you have a master's, a PhD in particular, but as I touched on, even our field experts, if you have decades of experience, we want to hear from you, and that'll also be available there. So would love to see more folks grow through that network, and we'd also love to see more folks work with Snorkel to get their data needs.
Yes, for sure. Or if they have any hikes they need to go on or mountain climbs,
That too.
Jake's your guy.
Movie
So,
recommendations, you name it.
yes, movie recs, you name it. Jake's your guy. Find us on social. Thanks for listening. Thanks for chatting with me.
Cheers.